Hello. I've got 3 intriguing stories from 4chan to share with you today. If you want to skip to a specific story, I've included time codes. Enjoy. Be me. Be around 1 a.m. working a long overnight shift, not scheduled to finish until around 8 a.m. Receive a call like usual, and I pick up. I begin the call like I usually would, trying to collect as much information from the caller as I possibly can to ensure that we can do everything to help. I do not get a response at all. I hear what sounds like heavy breathing, like really labored, like someone was running a 100m sprint while on the phone. I try my best to keep talking, thinking maybe the reception might be bad and the person cannot get through to me, but it does not work. Along with the breathing, I hear running on what sounds like some kind of gravel surface, and they are hauling ass. They sound like they are running with all of their might, and combined with the heavy breathing, it has me incredibly concerned. I just try my best to make myself heard so that they know I am here, if they can maybe somehow hear me so that they do not hang up and we can track the location from the phone GPS and send help over immediately. The call ends abruptly though, and that is it. Around 5 minutes go by in total before we receive a call again, and I pick up instantly. Now, in between the labored breaths, I can hear deep and heavy sobs, like when a child is inconsolable after they have been disciplined. I could hear their lip quivering, and they physically could not stop themselves from sobbing. The sounds of running on gravel were not there anymore, and I begin the call as usual again, trying to find out whatever I can. I get maybe 3 words out in total before the woman is talking at light speed, mumbling whatever words she can out of her mouth as fast as possible, only stopping for a second or two at a time to let out a large breath and to let out a slight sob. I try my best to calm her down, to reassure her that help will be on its way as fast as possible, but that I need to take information from her, and that she needs to help me to help her. She is still largely incoherent, but I'm able to make out more words the second time around. Something about underground and held captive and more people still there, but that was all I got. I tried to ask for her name, where she was, anything at all like that, but she kept shutting me down. She told me she could not tell me her name. She told me that they were after her, and that if I tell you my name, then my family is dead. They will know. I am trying not to freak out myself at this point, and I am begging dispatch to get there as quickly as they possibly can. They told me that they were having serious trouble pinpointing her location, saying that it was something to do with the service and the cell towers that she was near, but that they were working on it, and I just needed to keep her talking while they figured it out. I get her to take a breath, which in turn gives me a chance to calm myself down. She tells me she is being followed and that she does not know where to go. She tells me that if they find her and she goes back there, then she is dead. Just for reference, this call took place in the state of New York, but I will not narrow it down any further than that just in case. I asked her for any details that she could give me, to just start from the top. I was trained to keep her talking and find out anything I could while help was on the way. I was told that they had tracked her approximate location and had sent out a car immediately and would try to track her from there. She told me something I could barely fucking believed, but I encouraged her to talk no matter what. She finally calmed down enough for me to understand her, and I convinced her to finally tell me her name, which I will not repeat here. All I will say is that when I checked after the fact, she had been reported missing by her family almost a year prior to this call, but the case was closed as no further clues or evidence could be linked to the case. She started by telling me that she had been kept captive underground for the better part of the year. She told all sorts of horrible things. She told me that these were rich and powerful people that could do whatever they wanted and get away with it. I asked her if she was safe, and she told me she was hiding in some sort of alleyway, and no one had caught up to her yet. I asked why they had kept her underground, and she told me that she was not the only person that they were keeping down there. She told me that underneath New York, these rich and powerful people had some kind of human farm that they just kept adding to every so often, just to fuck with. It started out quite small, and she was one of the first that they made their move on. She had her family threatened, and was told that horrible things would happen to them if she and the rest did not comply. She told me at first they would tie them up and torture them until their vocal cords were too fried and worn out to even beg for them to stop anymore. She told me that they would amputate limbs until some people were nothing more than just a torso and a head and could not even function properly anymore. They were basically using them as lab rats for whatever sick and twisted experiments they could think of, and were being used just for fun. I just kept giving mejanchems or yeses just so she knew that I was still paying attention and was taking her 100% seriously. I took a look back at my supervisor multiple times throughout the call to give a look like, "Are you hearing this shit?" But they did not even look shocked. They looked nervous, panicked almost. We usually have 2 supervisors on shift, but it was not long until most of the department higher-ups were called in and hanging off of every word that this woman on the phone said. She said it started out small, but that more and more people kept being thrown in until the place was crowded. Became so crowded that you could not even move, that all you could do was stand upright, squeezed tight against the bodies of people writhing in torment and moaning in pain. At first, it was people who you would not notice: the homeless, addicts who had lost everything, chronic gamblers who people would expect to disappear because of their debts, that type of stuff. After a while, they stopped caring and just took whoever they felt like. It was New York. Anything could happen, and it would not look suspicious. It got so bad that it was becoming tough for the elites to perform their experiments thoroughly. They would have to toss in pieces of bread and other bits of food into the giant mass of people, and then they would watch them fight. People would bite and rip and claw each other over tiny scraps of food, and it got to the point where people would kill each other for those bits of food. Then the food got scarcer, and the amount of people kept growing. That is when they started eating each other. They would fight over the food and then eat the loser. If anyone became too weak that they collapsed or died, then they became more food for the slaughter. She told me that at first she thought that it was for testing experiments, some kind of viruses, but that after that it became entertainment before they just abandoned it altogether. She kept going and going, telling me about how when it was just a small amount of people, the elites would come in and inject people with weird-looking concoctions in exchange for food and other treats. She mentioned how one time a man came in offering a big lavish meal and chocolate for anyone willing to be the next test subject. There was a young Asian man who had a really thick accent who she thought was maybe from India. He apparently jumped at the chance and shouted over all the others and pushed them aside to be the one to be tested on. He begged for them to let him eat just a little first, telling them that he was going to die, but they promised him that as soon as the test was done, that he could anything he liked. They wheeled in some type of gurney and strapped him down and prepared something that was in a vial. They did it right in front of everyone and did not care. The vial had some kind of liquid, except it was too thick to be a liquid and was tinted a sort of purplish-brownish color, but it was difficult to make out in the low light. They did not inject it anywhere into his arms, but instead injected it into the veins on his neck. You could instantly see the pain in his eyes as it hit, and he started screaming so loud that it echoed throughout the tunnel. He started scrambling and trying to break free, but he could not get any of his straps off. All he could do was writhe and scream as the skin around his neck started to bubble and melt, until almost all of his face was peeling off. One of the men undid the straps for his hands and arms, and the young Asian man instantly started clawing at his own face. All this did was peel off more of his skin and face. It did not take long for him to die. He physically could not stop clawing and peeling away more and more of his face. They announced that it was a failure and threw the food to everyone else. She was about to tell me more, but she got really quiet all of a sudden and would not respond to anything I was saying. She started whispering down the phone very slowly. She told me she could hear footsteps and asked me if it was the police. I looked towards my supervisor and he nodded, and I told her that help was finally there. I told her that I was going to hang up the call once she confirmed that she was with one of our officers, but she begged me to stay on the line no matter what. She told me that there was one other guy and that he was the reason she got out, but that she did not know what happened to him. After about another 30 seconds, I heard screaming coming from the woman on the phone. All I could hear was something muffled coming from the phone speaker, and it sounded like it was broken somehow. About a minute after that, someone hung up the call. I tried calling out to her again and again, but she did not hear me or respond after the scream. I went on with my job as normal for the rest of the night. I asked about what happened after my shift was over, and the story I was told seemed suspicious in a way that I would not usually question. They told me that an officer found her in an alley like she said she was in, but that she was clearly high on something and screamed when she saw an officer. She apparently started fighting back and screaming at them that they were evil and that she did not want to go back and was clearly either a druggie or a psychopath. My supervisor told me that the officers took her to the hospital to get her cleaned up and that she passed away in the hospital from an overdose of meth not long after they dropped her off. I kept trying to press for more details from different people, but my supervisor pulled me aside and basically told me to drop it. He told me that he understood that the case was horrible and emotionally scarring, but that I was acting unprofessional and that I needed to be able to move on and put it to one side to be able to do my job properly, or that I would be forced to go on leave to seek therapy for the stress of my job. I dropped it, but I quit after another few weeks. Something about it just did not seem right or add up. Spiders in the head. Why do you guys always bring me to crazy places like this? Albert complained as we made our way through the abandoned house. It looked like something out of Victorian London. Suck it up, Albert, you big baby, I retorted. Me, Andrea, and Luke were way ahead of him. What is the point of life if you do not add a little excitement to it? What if we get ourselves killed here? Albert complained as he ducked under a cobweb. Would not that miss the point of living life to the fullest? Oh, you are hopeless, Andrea replied nonchalantly. Luke chuckled. Hey, look, I said. This place has a library. We all went inside. I wonder what kind of old books are in here, I said aloud. Maybe rare, valuable first editions, Andrea suggested. That ought to sell for tons of money, Luke chimed in. See, Albert, I said. I told you it was worth coming here. Albert did not seem to agree. Maisie, this was someone else's home once. How would they feel if they knew we were desecrating it? That is the point, Albert, Andrea said, exasperated. They are too dead to call the cops on us. Meanwhile, Luke was poking through the books. Albert did not seem amused by Andrea's quip. You guys, I am serious, he insisted. We need to get out of here before— Whoa! Luke shouted, jumping back from the bookshelf. A monstrous spider jumped out of a book and ran across the floor. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Andrea froze. Albert put his hands over his head to protect himself. See what I mean? Albert gulped. Come on, Al, that was just a spider, I said. I was losing my patience with his neurosis, though at the same time I was starting to get a little creeped out. Can we just go home now? Luke asked. I'm starting to get a weird feeling, too. Hold on, Andrea replied, tugging on one of the books. I think I recognize this one. It ought to sell for the book tilted forward like a lever. The whole bookshelf swiveled, revealing a secret passageway behind it. We all stared at the secret passageway, bewildered. Albert piped up, Did not we see this in a movie once? Against our better judgment, we slowly crept down the passageway. Torches embedded in the walls lit our way. This is bad, Albert whimpered with fear. This is bad, 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 bad. We need to go home before we get ourselves killed. I'm jumping out of my skin here, guys. Dude, chill out, Andrea said impatiently. Come on, Albert, Luke insisted. Relax, man. Nothing is coming to get you. Yeah, Albert, I piped up. You need to smoke joints less often if they are making you this paranoid. Shut up, Albert retorted. I have every right to be paranoid. We have illegally entered an abandoned house all just to look around. We could have just read a book or played a game, but no. You just had to lead us into this godforsaken place. So if we all get murdered by ghosts or whatever, do not come crying to holy shit, look, Andrea piped up, pointing. There was a corpse up ahead, all wrapped up in spider webbing. In fact, there were tons just like it. Albert finished his sentence meekly. Me? I ignored him. Is that a sarcophagus? I asked, pointing. I walked forward. Holy crap, Luke said. I have heard about this stuff. Back in Victorian times, the English were obsessed with Egyptian treasures. but the pyramids and sarcophagi had all sorts of deadly traps in them. "But why are these guys all wrapped up in spider webbing?" Andrea asked, poking one of the corpses. She flinched when its head crumbled to dust. "I do not know," Luke replied. "Maybe they managed to domesticate some kind of deadly spider? You guys?" Albert whimpered. We all turned to him at once. What we saw made us freeze. The biggest, ugliest spider we had ever seen in our lives was sitting on his head. "Brush it off, Al," Andrea ordered. "Yeah, Al, kill it," Luke barked. "Guys?" Albert whimpered, shutting his eyes. "Al, come on, do it before I started." But we were too late. The thing sunk its fangs into Albert. His eyes rolled up in his head and he crashed to the ground. "Bites you," I sighed. Our new friend crawled onto Al's ear and stuck its ass into it. A second later, its abdomen rippled as it laid its eggs. We all shuddered, revolted. Once the spider was finished, it dusted off its feet, jumped off Al, and ran off. Al woke up a second later. My head," he groaned. "You guys, my whole head hurts." "Al, we need to get you to a hospital," I said. "Yeah," Andrea added. "That thing just laid eggs in your ear." Albert did not seem to hear us. He just sat there, getting paler and paler. "I told you guys not to bring me in here." Luke had no patience for Al's rambling. He grabbed him and threw him over his shoulder. "Come on, Al, let us go," Luke boomed. He ran out of the secret room, leaving us to chase after him. Once we were out of the house, Luke put Albert down. "Albert, how are you feeling now?" Luke asked. Oh God," Albert groaned. His body was shaking. He looked green, and he sounded like he was having a stroke. "Al!" Luke shouted. Me and Andrea were aghast. "Ah, no!" Albert screamed, grabbing his head. A second later, his skull broke open. We watched, horror-struck, as thousands upon thousands of baby spiders crawled out of the hole in his head, along with his eyes, nose, ears, and mouth. His corpse collapsed to the ground. The spiders dispersed, running into the woods to hide. We shrieked in terror. Once the things were gone, we could finally catch our breath. Albert S. corpse lay on the ground, already beginning to rot. I shuddered, revolted, and turned to Luke. "Should we?" I started. Luke shook his head, looking shell-shocked. "We did not see shit. Got it?" Andrea looked horrified, but she nodded assent. I had to agree. What were we going to say? That we had been trespassing? That some kind of ancient Egyptian super spider had killed our friend? Some shitty excuse we were for friends, though. "Let us just run," I sighed. Together, the three of us hightailed it out of the woods, leaving our dead friend, the abandoned manor, and the spiders behind. The next day, I caught up with Luke at school. "Have you seen Andrea lately?" I asked. Luke shook his head. "I heard she was not even able to leave her room this morning." I sighed. I could not help but feel like this whole debacle had been my fault. Mostly because it had been. But what can you do? What is going to happen when they find Albert? I asked Luke as we walked through the halls together. Luke scoffed. "What? You think they are going to find him? He died in the middle of nowhere. Even if they do find him, they will not know what to make of it. They will probably think some psycho with an axe got him or something. God knows there are enough of those guys out in the country. I doubt they would suspect ancient Egyptian super spiders killed him." I shuddered. "Do you think the spiders are dead?" "What? Are you kidding?" Luke growled. It was hard to tell whether he was mad at himself or at me. No chance in hell. They were bred to live in Egyptian tombs, Maisie. They can probably survive off of anything. No, they are still alive. And now, thanks to us, they are loose. I took that in. What if they find the town? I asked. The things breed by laying eggs in people's brains, Luke. They kill people. What is going to happen? Luke did not answer. What if they find an airport? I asked. Then the world will end, probably, Luke replied. He sounded exhausted all of a sudden. I guess the fight had gone out of him. I looked down, dejected. We had done something horrible, clearly. The very future of humanity was in doubt. But at least we had each other. I put my arm around him as we walked out the doors together. Deadly Carnival. I have lived in a few houses growing up, but out of all of them, only one of them remains in my mind. It was the house before my parents died. When I was 14, we moved into a small 2-bedroom house in a small town in Oregon. The house sat at the end of a half-mile driveway that snaked its way through dense spruce trees. At the end was a clearing, and in the center of that was our house, looking as if it had been pulled straight from a fairy tale. Little did I know, it was the farthest thing from. I was a bit of a loner at the time, the kid that would rather sit away from everyone at lunch. My only friend was my headphones. I would drown out everyone else. One day, I was sitting alone like usual when a girl named Emma decided I would be a good friend. She walked up to me and started talking to me. It came as such a shock that all I could do was stare. Only after she asked me my name for the 3rd time was I able to reply. "Oh, I am Toby," I said, barely over a whisper. "I am Emma." "You are new in town, right?" she nearly shouted. Her energy was always equal to that of a squirrel who just did a line of coke off a car battery. "Yeah, I moved here from a small town down in California," I said, still not sure why this living fireball of a human was talking to me. She sat down next to me. "Cool. So, what house did you move into?" I hesitated before replying. The small 2-story one on the edge of town, with the really long driveway. Her face went pale as I mentioned the house. "You have not gone into the woods, have you?" She delivered the question with all the seriousness of a eulogy. "And no, why?" She looked over her shoulder as if someone was listening in on our conversation. "A long time ago, like before we were born, there was a carnival out there. It was run by a man named Edward Forrest. Everyone referred to him as Edward the Ringmaster, or just the Ringmaster. Well, one day a few kids went missing. Who better to blame when no suspect was found than the owner of the creepy carnival at the edge of town? There was no evidence, but that did not stop people from turning against poor Edward. One day a group of 3 or 4 men went out there to talk to him. No one knows what happened out there, but Edward was never seen again, and the carnival was left to rot. Rumor has it that at night, lights can still be seen from there, and some people even claim to have heard music from that area of the woods." As Emma finished her story, the bell rang, calling everyone back to class. Emma stood up, dusted herself off, and said, "Do not go into those woods at night." I flopped onto my bed. My parents were fighting downstairs. Anywhere else would be better than here. As I lay in bed, my mind drifted between thoughts until it managed to reach the conversation from school earlier. Me being well, thought since it was not night, I could go check out the supposed haunted carnival behind the house. Luckily, my window was pointed in the general direction of where Emma had said it was. I put my boots on and climbed out of the window, carefully lowering myself down to the ground floor. I snuck from the house to the tree line before making my way through. It took me about an hour of walking, but soon I began to come across evidence of life. Well, where life used to be. Old light bulb strings running between trees, some flyers half buried in the dirt, even an old railing like the ones police use. As I trekked farther and farther in, I began to see more and more evidence that there really was a carnival here. Up ahead, I could see a clearing where a few metal structures still stood. There was some form of generic spinning ride you see in every carnival, rusted over and overgrown with vines, as well as an old drop tower, once again nearly rusted beyond recognition, and an old snack cart knocked over and decaying. It was creepy, and yet it felt almost warm and inviting, like the memory of all the happy people coming through had seeped into the land itself. It was almost addicting. But as the sun began to set, I remembered Emma S.'s warning. "Do not go there at night," she had told me. It was enough to convince me to head home right then. Coming back to the house, I could see my dad's car was gone, tire tracks confirming a speedy exit fueled by anger. It was likely that he was not coming back tonight. I climbed back through the window so my mom would not know I had left. As I left my room, I could hear sobs coming from the master bedroom. This was all too common. I crept down the stairs and made a sandwich before deciding to go to bed. As I slept, my dreams took me back to the carnival. But in my dream, It was bright and colorful. The smell of fresh popcorn and various fried foods filled the air. A hand rested on my shoulder, and I turned to see who it was. Standing there was a tall man wearing a half-white and half-black tailcoat. On top of his head, coal-black hair spilled out from under a black and white spiraled top hat. He had a gentle smile on his face. He gestured toward the carnival and said in a slight English accent, "Have fun, kid." I spent the rest of the dream running around, riding rides, eating cotton candy and popcorn, and playing the games. I woke up, the phantom flavor of carnival snacks still on my tongue. Annoyed that the dream was over, I crawled out of bed and got dressed for school. Luckily, I was enrolled during the middle of the week, meaning it was already Friday. The day flew by, and next thing I knew it was lunch. I was eating in the same spot when Emma walked up and sat next to me. "So, did you see Edward S. Carnival lights last night? Why did this girl think we were suddenly friends?" "No, I slept all night." At that answer, Emma seemed disappointed. "Were you expecting a different answer?" She shrugged her shoulders. "I guess nothing weird at all." I thought back to the dream. Well, I had a dream about the carnival. At the mention of this, Emma perked up. "Really? What happened?" She almost yelled her reply out of excitement. "Yeah, nothing too weird." A tall guy in a black and white suit greeted me, and I spent my dream riding the rides, playing games, and eating snacks. The color drained from Emma's face again. "You said you saw a man in a black and white suit, right?" I was confused as to why she had latched onto this of all things, but I went along with it. "Yeah, black and white suit, black hair, black and white spiraled top hat." The more I talked, the more I could see Emma getting uneasy. Without saying anything, she pulled out her phone, typed something, and waited before turning her phone to me. "Is this who you saw?" As I looked at the phone, my heart dropped. On the screen was the man I had seen in my dream. "That is exactly who I saw," I said. Emma put her phone away. "That is Edward the ringmaster." I shook my head. "There is no way. It has to be a coincidence or something. I went there yesterday before nighttime. Maybe I saw a picture of him somewhere and did not even notice." Emma's eyes lit up. "You should stay up and see if you can see the lights. You might be close enough to hear music." I thought for a second. I should. It will tell if this is all real. During my walk home, I stopped at a gas station to pick up some energy drinks. If I was going to do this, I had to make sure I could make it through the night. As I got home, I noticed my dad was still gone. I climbed up the stairs and set up for the night before I realized I probably did not need the drinks. The excitement was more than enough to keep me well awake. As the hours ticked by, nothing happened. More time passed, and nothing happened. Finally, it was 4 in the morning when I saw it, a faint glow coming from the forest. As I stared, I could feel a warmth inviting me in. It felt almost as if I was being drawn in. What is the worst that could happen, I thought to myself. From Emma's story, Edward was not a killer. There was no evidence. He probably just wanted people to have fun. I decided I would get closer. I mean, what is wrong with wanting to take a closer look? I climbed out of my window and started the hike. As I walked, I saw the lights I had seen before, only this time they were shining bright. I kept walking, being drawn in. Soon I could hear faint music playing in the distance. I could not stop now. I had to know what was happening. I kept walking. The music grew louder and I began smelling food. Popcorn, fried hot dogs, funnel cake. The smells only made it harder to turn back. Suddenly I could see the carnival, all the rides shining bright, the smell of snacks being made, the games with prizes hanging. Not a speck of dust on any surface. As I walked, I heard a familiar voice. It was a man's voice with a faint English accent, and it rang out, "Good morning, young one. I am Edward the ringmaster, and this is my carnival. It has been quite some time since I have had a visitor. Please tell me, what is your name?" Despite being face to face with a ghost or whatever Edward was, I did not feel scared for some reason. "I am Toby. I live in the house just that way." I pointed back the way I had come. Edward smiled. "Well, young Toby, if it is fun you are looking for, you have come to the right place." It appears no one else is coming. You have my carnival as your own little slice of heaven." Edward disappeared into a puff of purple smoke. A hand was placed on my shoulder, and from behind me, I heard him once more. "Go ahead, kiddo. It is all yours." Behind every counter, a puff of purple smoke erupted, and as it cleared, in each spot stood a person. They each wore the same outfit as Edward, but with a mask. I walked up to one of the games and looked at the person. Their mask was black and white, split down the middle. A smile was painted across in gold. As the person leaned down, Edward S. voice came from behind the mask. "Young Toby, want to win a prize?" The masked person held out 4 baseballs. "Just knock the bottles down and win one of these." He raised a large raccoon plushie. I had spent the whole night as I did in my dream, playing games, eating snacks, and riding rides. Before sunrise, Edward stopped me. "I hope you had fun, kiddo, but I am afraid the carnival is closing. I recommend you head home now, but do not cry. My carnival will be here for you tomorrow night." I already knew I was going to go back. For the first time in years, I was able to enjoy myself. The past few years have been me laying in my room listening to the increasingly violent fights between my mom and dad. After the last one, my mom had not left her room. I wanted an escape from that hellish reality. I returned Saturday night and Sunday night, as well as Monday night, Tuesday, and Wednesday. It was now Thursday, and the sun was starting to go down. I was waiting for the lights to show. Today I saw them before the sun went down. Only these lights were not from the forest. They were coming from my dad's car coming down the driveway. He parked and sat in his car for a while. After the sun had been down for a while longer, he climbed out of the car, finished off his beer, and reached back in and pulled out a shotgun. I will never know what my parents fought about that week before, but it was enough to drive my dad over the edge. I began putting on my boots as he stumbled to the front door. Once I heard the front door open and close, I began climbing out my window again. By the time I was halfway across the clearing to the forest line, I heard a sound that has been engraved in my head. A shotgun blast echoed out of the house. In the dark, I could see the muzzle flash in the window of the master bedroom. I began sprinting. I did not have long before my dad would know I was gone. I ran as fast as I could into the forest. I could hear my dad's voice screaming my name behind me. While I ran, I knew I was getting closer to the carnival. I could see the lights, hear the music, and smell the food. It was the only place I could go. Something deep in my mind told me I would be safe there. I entered the park, but Edward was nowhere to be seen. I hid behind one of the game stalls as my dad entered the clearing. I heard him yelling my name. Then suddenly things went silent. I looked over the counter and saw Edward standing in front of my father, a scowl plastered across his face and all the hatred of hell behind his eyes. "Who the fuck are you and where did you come from?" My dad leveled his shotgun with Edward S. head. "I am Edward the ringmaster and you are in my carnival." Edward mockingly bowed. "Where is Toby, you circus freak?" Edward S. scowl turned into a grin. "You think I am a freak, huh? Just watch this." Edward S. mouth stretched open, showing hundreds of razor-sharp teeth. My dad pulled the trigger, but only succeeded in angering the beast I knew as Edward. The newly formed monster reached out and grabbed my dad by the head and bit through neck, severing his head. There was a sickening crunching sound as blood sprayed across the grass. Edward let go of my dad's body, letting it collapse to the ground. Edward turned to me, not even trying to hide his true self. "Come, young one, you can stay forever. I can make you happy beyond eternity." I shook my head, backing away. "Do not you want that?" Edward continued. "No pain, no fear, only this place you love so much?" Without saying another word, I turned and ran. I heard a scream of frustration behind me, like a predator who had lost its prey. Only now that the spell had been broken could I see the bodies all around in various states of decay. Some were skeletons, some still had meat on them. All were kids, they all looked to be ages 5 to 15. I never looked back. I ran back into town and was picked up by police. They investigated my house and the surrounding forest. They found my mom's corpse in bed and my dad's body in pieces. But they never found the bodies of the children at that old abandoned carnival. They ruled it as a murder-suicide. They said my dad had lost it after a fight, killed my mom, and then went out into the woods and killed himself. Then his body was ripped apart by local wildlife. I was sent to live with my aunt. I stayed with her until I was 18, and I moved as far from Oregon as I could. I do not ever want to go back.